What are the most common challenges that new writers face? Hi there, my name is Brian Collins and welcome to the Become a Writer Today show. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the 11 most common challenges that new writers face and how you can overcome them. Now, I hope you like the content in this video. If you do, hit thumbs up. And if you want to get my latest video or more writing advice like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The first common challenge that new writers face is everyday distractions. When you're trying to take writing a bit more seriously, it can be difficult to sit down and open up Word or Scrivener or your writing app of choice and focus on your first draft for 15 or 30 minutes. Because before you know it, an interruption will arrive. Your phone will go off, or you'll see a notification on your computer, or you'll think of something you've got to do in another room or with your family or at work. But the thing is, if you're going to take a first draft and get it to a place where it's publishable, or if you want to take your writing seriously, then you need to be able to focus for at least 30 minutes regularly. So here's what I recommend you do. Put your phone in airplane mode, turn off all notifications on your computer, and go to a quiet place in your house or your apartment, or if you don't have a quiet place there, go to the nearby coffee shop. Set a timer for 30 minutes and concentrate on nothing else but your first draft. If you've got the budget for it, I'd also recommend getting one of these. It's a set of noise cancelling headphones, and that'll help you eliminate all outside and external distractions. Now, I like using noise cancelling headphones listening to ambient music. I listen to the sound of rainfall or the sound of thunderstorms, and there's an excellent track I recommend you check out on YouTube and Spotify, so it's free. Joe Baker's Rainfall soundtrack, and it's basically ambient noise, and that can help you focus on your first draft or eliminate everyday distractions. The second biggest challenge new writers face is the feast or famine cycle. What do I mean by the feast or famine cycle? Well, a couple of years ago, I was working as a freelance writer in Ireland, and while I was working as a freelance writer, I landed a prestigious gig writing for a technology publication. I was delighted because it was a national publication and I really wanted to get my name in print. So I spent all month working on this article, which, paid me a nice amount once the article was published. And I was delighted to see my name in the Sunday papers. When the end of the month came along, I got my check, I got my name in print, and then nothing. The editor didn't have any commissions for the following month because of cutbacks at the paper. Now suddenly I had to scramble to find something else to pay the bills, and I ended up having to get a part-time job outside of writing. So if you'd like to avoid the feast or famine cycle, I got a fantastic piece of advice from the American screenwriter David Mamet, but it applies to all types of writers, whether you're writing freelance, whether you're self-publishing books, or whether you're writing articles on your site. Basically, you need to do one thing for your art or your craft every day, and one thing for your business every day. So what does one thing for your art or craft look like? Well, that could be writing your 500 words. It could be working on your first draft. It could be working on your articles or your prestigious commission. And what does one thing for your business look like? Well, it could be pitching clients, which is what I should have done. It could be setting up your author or website. It could be promoting your work on social media, or it could be doing podcast interviews if you're writing nonfiction to promote some of your published works. So ask yourself, what's the one thing I can do today that will advance my craft? And what's the one thing I can do today which will advance my creative or writing business and help me get paid regularly each month? The third challenge new writers face is not having enough time to write. Now, if you find yourself out of time to write, that's a pretty common challenge. And when I started taking writing seriously, it's one that I encountered. Why? Well, I was trying to write around a busy day job working for a British software company, and I was also trying to write around family commitments. At the time we had 2 kids, now we have 3 kids. So it's very hard to sandwich writing time in the day, because I'd come home from work and after all the kids went to bed, I'd sit down, turn on my computer, open up the blank page, and I'd be exhausted. I just wouldn't have time or the inclination to work on some articles for a site that I was building at the time. What I discovered is that I needed to put writing first in the day because that's when I was freshest. How did I do that? Well, I started getting up an hour or 2 earlier before work, and I'd work for 30 or 60 minutes on whatever the writing project was at the time. Now, I'm not necessarily saying you have to get up early to put writing first, but ask yourself, what part of the day are you most creative? What parts of the day are you most productive and less likely to get distracted? Because that's your valuable writing time. So is there a way that you can ring fence that time to focus on your creative projects? And it may mean saying no to other habits. So to get up early, I had to give up playing video games on Xbox. And at the time, I loved playing games like Call of Duty. But if I stayed up till 2 a.m. playing Call of Duty, I was pretty unlikely to get up the next morning to write or work on my first draft. So ask yourself, what am I going to give up and how can I protect the valuable writing time that I have in my day? The fourth most common challenge new writers face is writer's block. So you open up Word or Scrivener, you look at the flashing cursor on the screen and nothing. Now, writer's block, some people say it's a myth. Some people say it's a problem that takes them years to overcome. I'm kind of on the fence about it. I think writer's block is a symptom when you've spent not enough time researching your current writing project or not enough time consuming the right media or source materials. So I write a lot of nonfiction. So to write nonfiction, I need to have a system for research. My system for research involves taking notes from books and articles and courses that I read and take, summarizing them in my own words and putting them into a personal Zettelkasten or slip box. Basically, this enables me to review all of this research before it's time to outline an article that I'm going to write. And then when I have the outline, I can then go ahead and write the article. You don't necessarily need a system like this, but ask yourself, are you consuming the right materials to inform your creative projects? And generally, the right materials isn't news or social media. The other technique I'd recommend for conquering writer's block is called free writing. And this is something that I learned from the author Natalie Goldberg. Basically, you take a writing prompt, and in my book, the Become a Writer Today series, I have 101 writing prompts which you can use. You use the writing prompt, you type it into the top of your manuscript, and you use it as a jumping off point into your first draft. You write about whatever comes to mind for 15 or 30 minutes without stopping to edit or censor yourself or even to correct anything that sounds ridiculous. The idea is much like a weightlifter at the gym warming up before a big session. This will help you warm up for a writing session. And if you're a new writer, using writing prompts and free writing like I've just described is particularly useful because it will also help you cultivate a habit of writing consistently. And often that's enough to beat writer's block. The next biggest challenge that new writers face is feeling like it's an unproductive day. You look at your word count, you look at your finished articles, and you say to yourself, I accomplished nothing. I've got a huge to-do list. How am I going to get through it all? How am I ever going to build a writing career? If you feel like you're unproductive, then ask yourself, what are the 3 most important things that I need to do each day? Work through those 3 things before you move on to something else. If 3 is overwhelming, pick one thing that you need to do. For a writer, that one thing can often be writing 500 words or submitting an article to a client or publishing an article on your site. Then I'd recommend taking all of those other projects and ideas that you have and putting them into a trusted system where you can review them later on. Now, I use to-do lists and I also use productivity software like Trello and Dynalist. You don't necessarily need to use any fancy software. You can simply use a whiteboard or you can just write your to-do list down on pen and paper. But getting all of the ideas out of your head and all of the tasks out of your head will free you up for focusing on writing. And then you'll be surprised by how much you can accomplish if you keep turning up each day and working on your most important task and working through the items on your to-do list. The other thing to remember is we're not productivity robots. Not every day is meant to be productive. Not every day you're meant to be massively effective. Sometimes it's good to take a break, to take a step back, to recharge, and then when you turn up the following day, you may be able to accomplish quite a bit more. The next biggest challenge new writers face is self-editing your work. It can be difficult self-editing. I know I've often written a first draft, thought it was amazing, opened up the first draft, read through the manuscript and said this isn't very good at all. But here's the thing, the job of a first draft is simply to exist. So take advice from Stephen King, who said, write with the door closed, rewrite with the door open. In other words, when you're working on your first draft, don't worry about fixing mistakes, don't worry about how it sounds. That's the type of issue, or those are the type of issues you fix when you're self-editing. Now, I recommend writing and editing at different times in the day. Typically, I like to write in the morning and edit in the afternoon because these activities engage different parts of the brain. One is expansive and creative, the other is critical and analytical. I also recommend using self-editing software. So I use grammar checkers like Grammarly and Pro Writing 8 to check my first drafts and to speed up the self-editing process for articles I publish on my site. And I also recommend that you engage a proofreader for a longer piece of work, like a book chapter or a book that you're going to publish, because they'll help you find and fix errors much faster than if you try to do it yourself. If you don't have a budget for working with a proofreader, you could always send your drafts to a family member. And then when I got started, I joined a local creative writing group, and that was fantastic because I was able to get feedback on my stories and nonfiction essays at the time for free. The only thing I had to do was critique other people's stories. So in other words, don't endlessly rewrite your first drafts. Do take time for self-editing, but just self-edit at a different time of the day from when you work in your first draft. The next biggest challenge new writers often face is managing deadlines. And this was something I struggled with. When I was a freelance journalist, an editor called me into the newsroom one day and he said, "Brian, if you don't submit your stories on time, then I can't go to press on time with them. And that means you're not doing your job and I'm going to have to fire you." So thankfully he didn't fire me, but that job didn't work out and I moved on to another writing job. But I've learned painfully over the years that deadlines are not to be feared. In fact, as a writer, they're your friend, because deadlines get you into the habit of publishing and submitting your work. And it's only by pressing publish or submit or send that you get feedback from editors and readers. Even if the feedback is negative or even if you hear crickets, it's enough for you to move on to your next project and perhaps change your approach. On the other hand, if you endlessly rewrite the same piece over and over, you're doing yourself a disservice. Now, if you really struggle with deadlines, here's an approach that I learned from a book about Elon Musk. Set 2 deadlines. Set one deadline for yourself. That's a deadline that you're going to hold yourself to. And then set another deadline for your client or your publication or submission date. And that deadline is a few days after the deadline you set for yourself. That way you've given yourself a small window or small buffer. So if you miss your personal deadline, you'll still be able to hit the deadline for your client. And if you do feel like you're going to miss a big deadline, do communicate with the clients that you're working with. So I regularly work with freelance writers on the content publishing sites that I run. And sometimes when writers are falling behind on deadlines, it's radio silence over email. And as somebody who's waiting to publish a series of articles from them, it's more disconcerting to hear nothing than to hear from a writer who says, "Look, I got sick," or "Something happened with my family," because then I can, make arrangements or find other articles to publish. But when I hear nothing, I'm saying to myself, what's going on? Is this person going to contribute the articles at all? And are they reliable? So do check in early and often with your client or your editor if you feel like you're falling behind on a deadline. The next biggest challenge new writers face is not having a system for research. Whatever you write, it's critically important that you have a way of organizing your notes, your story ideas, and other interesting anecdotes that you come across. Now, I've described briefly earlier on the system that I use. It's called the Zettel-Kasten method. If you're interested in learning more about that system, check out the great book, Taking Smart Notes, on Amazon. There are a couple of other research systems you can use. You can just clip articles into Evernote. You can also create a commonplace book. You can also simply use index cards, whereby you write down ideas on an index card and you keep them in a personal filing system on your desk. In other words, you don't necessarily need to use fancy software or learn fancy techniques. But what you do need is a system that you use, and a system that's accessible, and a system whereby you review your notes and research regularly. Particularly if you write nonfiction, because when you turn up in front of the blank page and you try to write something, you need to be able to quickly access your notes, research, outlines, and story ideas. So ask yourself, the next time you're reading an interesting book or you come across an interesting fact, what does this mean to me? What does this mean to my work? And how can I use this information? And then store your ideas on an index card, in a journal entry, or in Evernote, or whatever software you're using. And get into the habit of doing this regularly. Once a week, review your notes and research, and also get into the habit of extracting them and using them in your next project. Because having a system will help you massively increase your output as a writer. The next biggest challenge that new writers face is feeling like their work isn't good enough. A couple of years ago, I took a series of intense creative writing classes in the Irish Writers' Centre in Dublin. Our instructor, who was a balding Texan, tasked us with writing one great sentence. He tasked us with writing a sentence on caliber with something that Ernest Hemingway would create. The thing is, this was all but impossible, and he knew it. But I kind of took his advice to heart, and I went home and I spent over a year writing and rewriting the same half a dozen short stories. And what I learned was that by rewriting the short stories but without publishing them, I wasn't getting feedback. But not only that, when you work on something endlessly, your ability to do something improves and you start to see flaws and mistakes that you missed last time around. So if you feel like your work isn't good enough, perhaps your ability has improved at the particular genre or at the particular topic that you're working on. If you also feel like your work isn't good enough, that's a normal fear that new writers have, and one you can quickly overcome by pressing publish. Feeling like your work isn't good enough is a sign that you're sometimes ready to move on to the next level. And to be honest, your biggest challenge as a writer isn't what people will think of your work or that they'll think it's terrible. It's getting their attention in the first place because there's so much noise out there. The next biggest challenge that new writers face is isolation and loneliness. So writing can be a pretty introverted profession. I'm an introvert, so I love writing, but often it means spending time alone in a room like this with you, your ideas, and your stories. And even if you're writing around the margins of a day job, you still spend a lot of time in your head thinking through your articles and your creative projects. What I recommend you do is find a way to balance having time to focus and get into deep flow state, but also with connecting with other people. So I enjoy long distance running, so I spend some time at a local athletics club. Not saying you need to take up running, but what hobbies or pursuits can you cultivate outside of writing and outside of being by yourself that help refill you and give you ideas for your stories? You could also connect with other writers by joining a local writing group, or you could even join an online mastermind. And I've tried all of those approaches over the years with varying degrees of success. But at the end of the day, writers still need to go out into the world and find source material that they can use in their work. The final challenge that new writers face is just feeling uncreative. So sometimes you'll turn up in front of the blank page and you'll write something and it feels staid and boring and you're just not happy with how you're expressing your ideas. So there's a fascinating set of cards that I came across a few years ago. They're called the Oblique Strategies by the musician Brian Eno. He came up with these with Peter Schmidt in the late 1960s. They were collaborating on an album and they wanted to reduce the amount of time it took them to get into a creative state while in studio, because at the time it was really expensive to rent a studio. Now the the oblique strategies are popular with all types of creatives, not just musicians. Basically, they have a series of commandments on them that you can use for your creative projects. The commandments are kind of ambiguous, and the idea is that you just draw from the deck and you go with whatever it says. So this one here says, slow preparation, fast execution. So if I was reading this card, what I would do is I would spend a bit more time getting all my writing notes, materials, and research ready for whatever the creative project is. And then I would set a timer and I would go as quick as possible until I hit a word count. That's the way I would interpret this card. Perhaps your interpretation will be different. There's a couple of 100 cards in the deck. They also say things like go outside, shut the door, make a sudden, destructive, unpredictable action, incorporate, and so on. So there are interesting prompts which can get you to think about your creative project in a different way. So there you go. Those are the 11 most common challenges that new writers face with potential solutions that you can use. I hope you enjoyed the content in this video. If you like more videos like this, let me know in the comments section. And don't forget to subscribe to the Become a Writer Today channel.